Hello, everybody. Welcome to yet another Mantisa Data Science webinar slash Fireside chat. Today, we are talking with Eric Weber. I won't need to introduce you to him, but I'll just give a short introduction and allow him to introduce more in detail. Eric Weber, right now, I think is Senior Director and Head of Data Insights at List Reports. And he's been a prolific writer on LinkedIn, and that's where we've interacted via text. But this is the first time we'll be chatting with each other face to face, so I'm really excited for that. And yeah, he was earlier at LinkedIn, and he's been at many different companies. So without further ado, let me just get Eric onto the discussion. Eric, thank you so much for joining us today. I tried to give a good enough a basic introduction of you, but I don't know if I've done a good job. Maybe you can start off with an introduction of yourself.
You did a great job, thank you. As far as intros go, I never know exactly what to talk about, but I think the key ideas are, I did start writing when I was at LinkedIn back in 2017, and it's kind of remarkable. So a lot of the people that you see active on LinkedIn, like Fabio Vasquez and Kate Strachny and everybody else, we all kind of started writing around the same time, and it's kind of awesome to see where it stands just a few years later. We're having fun with it. It definitely has, like, posting publicly has its moments, but the data science community, and not just the community in the US, but the community worldwide, is really strong. And that's something that you're seeing with having so many people active. As far as me personally, I'm from the academic world originally, so I used to teach statistics and experimental design. I got a little bit tired of how long it took to do anything in the academic world. Like a paper would go from, you'd submit it. I submitted a paper in 2009 and it was published in 2015. Like, you can imagine how, like, impact is slower. So I prefer the business side. Getting to go quickly to impact is a big deal for me. And I've been in different roles along the way. And yeah, so this is actually an interesting time. So yesterday was my last day at List Reports, and Monday is my first day at Yelp. So so I'm
Congratulations.
moving. It'll be interesting. I'll post more about it on Monday, specifically about the role. But again, it's going to focus heavily on experimental design, heavily on analytics, which kind of goes along with a lot of the things that I write about and talk about. That's something to note. Most of the things that I talk about are generated from things that I experience every day, right? That's the best content you can generate, is thinking about the issues that you come across yourself, because it's much more authentic and it's meaningful to people. So maybe we can start there and jump into however you want to drive the conversation.
Sure. What's interesting to me is that you mentioned you were in academia for some time. Were you a researcher? Did you do a PhD?
Yeah. So I did my PhD in math with a heavy focus in statistics. So the academic world, I was a tenure track. I was on the tenure track as an assistant professor. I was at Oregon State and then at University of Minnesota. But 5 years in, I don't even know how to describe it. I love the teaching component. The research component was fine, but when you think about how you're evaluated in the academic world, it's very much about how many articles did you publish, how much impact did you have. I think it's kind of ironic that for all of the articles that I published in journals, a single post that I make probably gets read by more people than all of those articles combined. So it's really interesting to think about that, like how much I put years into writing articles, and then I can write something in 5 to 10 minutes and it gets seen by more people. So I think that's something to consider too, is like the reach of what we do in podcasts, posting, you've seen it happen with your own account, right? You can reach a remarkable number of people,
Absolutely.
and people are much more willing to read a short form post than they are willing to read an entire journal article.
I think that's in general with the changing attention spans of people around the world, right? There's rise of apps like TikTok and all the short form content apps. So no, so the reason I brought up PhD, I'm still not getting into the template that I shared with you. The reason I brought up PhD is because there's a lot of questions around: do I need to be a PhD to get into data science? Do I really need to have that background? So you had that background, but how would you answer this question?
No, it's a pretty simple answer. A PhD, look at it this way. If I see that someone has a PhD, I think about it in this manner. Potentially they have a really specialized skill set, so they would be apt for like a research team at Microsoft or Google or something like that. Like for those teams, yes, a PhD is generally necessary because you are literally doing research. You're basically asked to publish at prominent conferences around the world. And so in that case, sure. But 99.99% of positions in data are not on those teams. A PhD to me, if you have it, signals a couple of things. One, it means that you went through a lot of pain typically. Like it's honestly a signal that you can work extremely hard, that you can work on complicated ideas and get something done. It's also, I think it's a nice to have, but
Sure.
any company that says we must have a PhD, you must have a PhD to be in this role, typically that means to me that they don't really understand what they're looking for. Just like going to a prominent school carries weight with it, having a PhD can carry weight with it too. Sure. But it's not necessary for entry. And I don't think it really ever will be, because if you think about the time investment for yourself, a PhD versus, I do encourage master's degrees. Like, I think if people can find a way to make it work financially and time-wise, master's degrees are a very positive addition. But a PhD is like tacking on 3 more years. And at that point, if you think about just the time, and like you could spend 3 years learning on the job rather than writing a dissertation, and I think that's important. But I do see that conversation, and to me, I'm skeptical of any company that says you must have a PhD to do this job. Like, it doesn't make sense to me.
Sure. Yeah. In fact, I think the conversation, I try to read a lot of online stuff, and I think there's a lot of conversation on how you need to have a PhD to be able to work in this field and all that. But that is also US centric from what my point of view. I don't see a lot of that conversation happening in India, because I don't see that like that as an expectation for you to be having. Like, it's okay if you don't have a PhD in India. So that's a divide in terms of the market itself. I would see that.
It's not only US centric, it's Silicon Valley centric. So I think it's important to keep in mind that a lot of the advice you hear and descriptions of interviews and processes and stuff like that is very often based on, it's biased toward larger companies. Like, if you think about Google and Facebook and companies like that, they tend to people tend to focus on what's going on with them, but they're not representative of the industry.
Sure.
They're just not. And that is, and so yes, especially outside of the US, like, I don't even think having the conversation, do you need a PhD, is useful, because the resounding evidence just says you don't.
Yeah. Okay, so maybe we can get into the template. So one of the questions I had was, what do you do in your current role? Which I don't know if that is a question I can still ask.
That's funny. So I can tell you what I'm going to be doing, I guess, going forward. So the group at Yelp, when you think about experimentation, right, on a large platform, what it means to run, hundreds of experiments simultaneously. It requires engineering, it requires data, it requires building internal products so that people can run and interpret these tests. So in a lot of ways, it will be a partnership between engineering, data, UX design, product managers, things like that. So it's going to focus heavily on experimentation. And then I'm also going to be focusing on trying to so Yelp's data is very much focused on small businesses. And so with COVID and with the economic changes, the impact on small businesses is really important for understanding economic recovery. So we'll hopefully be doing things that are a bit more public facing when it comes to sharing on perspectives about the economy. So yeah, it'll be fun. I mean, it's interesting. Yeah. Yesterday was the last day. Monday is day one. So again, that could completely change. But but in general, at any role that I'm in, it's a combination of like technical leadership, but also managing up and managing down. Right? Like if you think about data science leadership, you have to be able to lead your team, right, and have them trust in your ability to do that and help them think through problems, but also you have to manage expectations.
Absolutely.
People above you, right? Like, what is your team doing? Why am I spending this much money on your team? Like, all of these sort of issues come up. So that will be the day-to-day. That's and yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, that question kind of fits right in the middle. But it will be fun. Hopefully over time I'll be able to share more about what's happening.
Sure. So it's interesting. I think you were doing some experimentation work in your previous role now, and now at Yelp as well, you would be continuing that. But a lot of people who tend to traditionally talk about data science, they don't talk a lot about experimentation as part of data science. Like, I mean, it's seen as part of data science, but it's not seen as the primary part, right? Like the focus is more towards statistical learning or the machine learning methodologies rather than. So have you always been in this area? Is this something that you've developed interest on lately? How do you see this?
It's sort of been an interest of mine since I was in the academic world. Like experimentation was something that I've studied a lot and worked with a lot. And I think it's important to consider the value that it provides. Like it's not traditionally viewed as the core of data science. But if you want your model to ever make it to production or impact, or you want to change features and do meaningful things, you're going to have to understand its impact before it goes live, right? And I actually think experimentation is in a lot of cases what keeps models from ever getting into a business context, is because they don't understand what matters or what impact it's going to have. Because the first question that people ask before you make a massive change is, what's going to happen to user traffic? What's going to happen to this metric? And if you're not able to tell them, they're not going to approve the change.
Yep. You need to have all the answers before you can propose something.
Yeah, you do. You have to have, and it's not just something that I would encourage people to think about as well. Is data science is very much like a product focused enterprise. Like typically you are trying to help product make better decisions about what to do. And so part of that is doing experimentation. It's like and often, and this gets back to something I've posted about many times, right? Like generally people coming into data science are too weak in statistics. That is like it's a core issue, because you're limited by what you can do if you don't have a good understanding. And this doesn't mean that you need to have an advanced degree in like all the areas of stats, but you need to have the core foundations really well mastered
Sure.
to be as effective as you can.
Sure. Yeah, so I think that leads really well into the next question on how did you actually get started in the field? I know you've mentioned a little bit on your PhD, but maybe you can just give us a broader outlook on that.
Yeah, this is actually an interesting story. So in 2013, 2014, I was kind of getting frustrated with academia. I was like, I had just gotten an annual review, and they were like, well, you published 4 papers, but you should have published 5. And I was like, this is ridiculous. Like, I can't deal with this for much longer. So I was actually talking with my dad, and he was an engineer at IBM at the time. And I posted about this before, but he, like, at the time, IBM was starting to do a lot of their work with Watson and stuff like that. And he was like, well, like, you should check out, like, big data stuff. And I'm like, sure. Because at the time I was dealing with relatively small scale data sets. I wasn't having to think about distributed computing or anything like that. And so I did, and I was like, wow, this is cool. And honestly, the first formal data science course that I took was like with data science in the title was on Coursera from Johns Hopkins. That was in the 2013. So like, this is also why I'm a pretty strong proponent of, like, it doesn't really matter where you start in the field. Like, you just have to keep moving once you're in it, right? It's like, there's no perfect start. There's no perfect resume thing that's going to get you a job. Like, yeah, that's why I have, like, my Coursera certificates and data camp certificates on my profile, because they're useful. So from that point on, it was trying to figure out how to make my interest in statistics and academic background useful for business. And it's a big mindset change, right? Like, a lot, like, you really have to go in and instead of saying, like, I'm going to work on this research project, you walk in and you have to say, now I need to help the business make money. At the core of it, that's what it's about, right? It's like, we can talk all about, like, oh, we want career growth, we want to do good things for the world. Like, if you're going to do good things for the world within a business, you also need to be benefiting them financially. It's just like, it's a hard truth. People don't like to talk about it, but that's how it is.
It's also because where we sit, right? If you're working as a data scientist or data analyst, you're sitting in a room of executives. You're sitting with the people making the decisions, because you're trying to help them guide in their decisions, right? So contrast that with, say, an engineering team, which is trying to build the platform. It's not really tied to the business metric. I mean, of course it is. But you're not monitoring business metrics if you're in a team. So I think that's all.
Sorry, I think you might be breaking up on your end.
Hi, Eric. I think Emad is facing some network issues.
No, that's okay. So yeah, I'll take it for a little bit, and we'll see what he. This is also the adventure of everyone being at home. It's really fun. So what he was speaking to is, and I have questions in Q&A, and we can run from there. But what he's speaking to is, data is very different from engineering, right? It's when you're working in an engineering space, you can kind of work on your project without having a mind or attention set toward the business, right? You're just working on a feature, you're working on some level of details. But the difference in data is that the stuff you do often translates directly to monetary impact, money, whatever it may be. And so that mindset has to completely change. it's something that's uncomfortable for people. People that come from academia are, and this is true not just in the US, this is true in India, this is wherever you're coming from, you have to be hyper focused on helping the business generate revenue or make better decisions. If you aren't, then they're going to wonder what the value is of the work that you're doing. So there are some questions that I will start taking, and I'm going to take these, sort of in order, like, to make it somewhat coherent with where we were starting. So there is a question about, how about if you're not from an engineering field, how do you get into data science, right? This is a fair question. Generally speaking, to me, it doesn't necessarily matter if you're coming from an engineering field or not. It's nice to have often, because the technical skill sets that are present are often helpful to give you a chance to really dig in and really get to understand the infrastructure, how to work with data. But generally speaking, it matters more that you understand business and understand business problems. So if you're an analyst, if you work with financial data, if you do anything for a business and you understand their problems, that's a very fair way to get into data, eventually getting into data science, because the core of it is that you can ask questions that are intelligent, that help the business make smart decisions. Whether you're from engineering or another field, that doesn't necessarily matter. But in terms of preparation, the most important things you can do, one, you have to have a core foundation in statistics. You absolutely have to. If you don't have that core foundation in stats, it's going to be extraordinarily difficult for you to make the progress into the field that you want to make. The second thing is to get comfortable working with data that is not clean. And so by that, I mean, most data sets that you work with online can often be, I'd say they're too clean. Like, they're set up to do really clean analysis with. In reality, most of the data that you deal with on a daily basis is going to be messy. It's going to be unpleasant. And so finding data sets that actually give you a reasonable picture of what's happening in the real world is really important. Those are the two things if you're going to start: statistics, and also getting familiar working with data that is not super clean. So when I think about books to read in ML and AI, again, I'm speaking from a business perspective here. There's a lot of really good lists of actual machine learning books. What's happening is that you need to find books that focus on business. So there's a really well-known book called Data Science for Business. It does a really good job of discussing data science, statistics, techniques in the context of helping a business make decisions. It's relatively well-known. It's pretty prominent. The author actually, unfortunately, passed away recently. But the book was one of the first things I read in the field. It's incredibly important, and it helps you really get a sense for, how do I talk about modeling and stats and data in the context of actually making money for a business. So I know we jumped on a couple of the questions, so it looks like you're back in business.
Eric, I'm sorry.
Internet connectivity is always an adventure. So I just started taking some of the questions from Q&A, so we're totally good to go.
Great. Thank you so much for taking it up. I don't know. I don't remember what we were talking about. Let me
All good. We can pick up wherever you want. So. Okay.
So yeah, you mentioned about how you got started. It was your dad that helped you get started, which is like how most Indian parents are. I don't know how it happened there, but anyway.
I heard that story, and when I was in Bangalore last year, I was like, they're like, yeah, my family helped. Like, that's how it started for me too. I'm like, okay, there's a lot more similarities and differences. I love that.
All right, so that takes me to my next question, which is a very interesting question. What is something that you would do differently today if you were to start today? So whatever you did when you started versus now.
I'd worry less about trying to learn every tool and instead focus more on understanding the core of the business that I'm in. There's a temptation when you get into the space to learn all of the tools, learn R and Python, learn SQL. But in reality, it's the thing that takes the longest to learn is generally the business.
Sure.
Understanding. So if I look at someone who comes into a business and whether they're going to be successful, yes, technical skills matter, but what matters more is that they are able to understand what metrics matter to the business, right? Like a lot of what we do in data science is actually focused on metric development, right? Like coming up with useful metrics is really hard. It's really hard, and it also requires so much. How do I put this? It requires so much deep understanding of what matters to leaders, what actually is useful, because typically what happens is leadership will focus on typical metrics, right? Like if you're doing a product, they'll focus on daily active users, weekly active, monthly active, that type of thing. But that probably doesn't tell the whole story. Those are like vanity metrics, right? What you care about is engagement. And so I would focus less, like if I was to go back and tell myself in like 2014, like here's what's going to matter. Then no one's going to care if you are doing it in R or in Python or SQL or Excel. They're going to care that you can actually figure out what matters. Sure. And so it often involves so I used to think about onboarding new employees from the perspective of we have to teach them all the tools, but it's a lot more about teaching them the business. Like the tools they can figure out along the way, but like if they don't understand the business 6 months in, then there's no chance that they're going to be able to do anything useful.
Sure. I think you made a very good point on the metrics, and I see this also in my work and work of other people as to how you can align your technical metrics with the business metrics, and again reconcile both of these so that whatever technical suggestions or technical decisions you take are aligned with the best for the business.
Yeah,
and so
we often want to, a good example would be you could come up with the best model in the world, and that's not necessarily going to be useful for the business in that moment. Like something I see often is people come up with models that end up saying like, hey, this variable is really important, or this variable is really important. Fine, but if you come into a presentation and you say this is important or this is important, and the variables you identify are not actually actionable, right? Like essentially the business can't do anything about them. Then let's think of what the miss you're gonna. They're like, okay, well, the success of our business basically depends on something entirely outside of our control. Told them nothing that can help them make a decision internally. But you may have built an awesome model. It doesn't matter. So those are good examples about making sure that what you build and create is aligned to the business and aligned to the value that they need.
A very related question on that. So how do you propose somebody who has again, a lot of people who are coming into this field are being said that, like you said, if you learn R, Python, SQL, all of these things, you are likely to do well in data science. But hearing from you, that is not what you're saying. You're saying you need to have the domain expertise. You need to really understand how.
It's more about.
So my question was, how do they develop the sense of understanding even before they come into the company?
So for me, my perspective is that you probably won't have the sense developed before you enter a company.
Yeah.
And so I don't want it to come off as I'm saying you have to have developed this expertise before you go into a role. My point is that you have to have the mindset. So like when you're interviewing, right? When you're interviewing and they ask you like, what questions do you have for us? Right? If you ask, what do my first few months look like and how are you going to help me learn about the business so that I can deliver value? Like that will shock them because nobody ever asked that question.
Sure.
Nobody does. I mean, they almost always ask, well, what tools do you use? What tech stack do you have? What models have you built recently?
Yeah, I'm guilty of this. Yeah.
Yeah. It's so interesting. And so like just being, but it's on two sides. It's understanding that as a candidate that it's important that you go to a place that is going to allow you time to learn the business. But also I think sometimes the business doesn't understand that they need to teach a lot, right?
Sure.
Like you can't just bring somebody in and say, okay, read this paper and now you understand our business. Like if that's true, then your business probably isn't very worthwhile. Like,
sure, makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. I think you sort of answered the next question that I had. So the next question was, what are some of your learnings from your experiences so far? So
yeah,
I think most of it was, Okay, so what are your thoughts on the different roles in data science per se? So what do you have to say on that? A data analyst versus a data scientist versus a business analyst? Do you see them as different roles? Do you see them as a kind of a fluid structure where everyone's flowing into each other? What do you think?
In a perfect world, there would be different roles, but in reality, they're not because titles don't make any sense. Like every company has its own rules about what they call data science, business analyst, data analyst.
Sure.
And so for me, I think it's more productive to think about like the title, like data professional, and then figuring out what is it that you do within the company that matters. I don't think we're ever going to get to a place where we have standardized titles across companies. So like we shouldn't hope for that. But what I do hope is that companies start to understand that by defining a role as an analyst or a scientist, it actually is helpful for everybody because it tells candidates what you're looking for. It gives that, like, you know, we talk about data science a lot, but some people, they like doing the analyst work. They don't want to do data science work. But if you create an analyst role where you also expect them to be a data scientist, like that's challenging for people. It's intimidating. It actually leads, I've seen for a lot of people, it leads to getting burned out because they're suddenly asked to do all of these extra things. And so for the roles, in an ideal place, I see them as relatively distinct from each other, and that analyst focuses much more on metric development, business reporting, trend analysis. Scientist focuses more on model development, thinking about scalability of models and insights. But in reality, it's kind of a mess.
But I also see
a
few well-defined roles. Like the role of a data engineer is pretty well defined that way.
Yes, so data engineer is pretty well defined. That might be one of the few that's well defined. I mean, data, like when you think about database developer, data engineer, like it's pretty well understood what they're going to be working on. It's like this data science area. People are just like, hey, go work on the data. I'm like, okay, what does that mean? Even something like a data science manager can mean many different things, right? In some companies, that means you're not going to be doing hands-on work and you are going to be just literally managing a team. In other places, it means that you're still going to be spending 60 or 70% of your time doing individual work. And it depends on the needs of the company. So I encourage people, instead of focusing on the title, focus on the job description. Like, what do they actually want you to be doing? Whether it's an analyst role or a scientist role, like that can also often be negotiated
Yeah.
in the process. Like if you get through and they want to hire you and be like, hey, the work you want me to do is more of a data scientist role, then
Yeah.
it's okay to push. And this is true not just in the US. This is true all over the world, because a lot of
Yeah.
companies, they just don't know what they want. Right?
True.
That's the core of the
And
core of
I've seen this very interesting trick some of the companies use as well. So they would title your role as data analyst, but they would ask you, like I said, to work on a data scientist position and pay you less because
that's the key. It's
yeah.
like all of a sudden you get paid less. You're like, no,
Yeah,
that's not.
I was like, it doesn't match up. It doesn't add up. Like you are calling him a data analyst and making him work as a data scientist, but you don't want to call him a data scientist because you don't want to pay him that much. It's crazy.
It's that would be more in the side of ethics and hiring. Like, but I do worry about it, and I want people to know that, like, companies do that kind of stuff, and you have to be careful to make sure that you are getting what you deserve for the position that you're in, because this happens and it's frustrating.
You mentioned burnout. I actually made a note of burnout. It wasn't in my initial set of questions, and also you wrote a post about it a couple of days ago on burnout. And also it was a question asked by one of our listeners in the previous version of this podcast. So I am seeing this theme reemerging about people getting burnt out in this field. Again, it's due to various reasons. One of the reasons I see is because there is so much that you can never know if you know enough, right? So what are your thoughts on this?
I think burnout in this field is not so different from burnout in others. If you look at, like, this is more US centric, but like a very large portion, like half of the teachers who start in the US quit the field within 5 years. Like that's been true for a long time. So what they like, thinking about why it happens is really important, right? There's and it happens in teaching same way it happens in data. People go into the field not really prepared for the day-to-day work. And by that I mean there's the teaching. For us, there's the data. But there's so much else around it. Like you're dealing with people, you're dealing with management, you're dealing with people who are trying to come and ask you things all the time, who don't actually, where they treat you, they're like, go pull the data for me, right? Like that type of stuff is something that people don't expect. And it weighs on them. And so when you think about burnout, it's often like a misalignment of expectations. Nobody really told them what to expect. And so they're like, well, I'm just going to be building models and doing this all day. But that's not actually what's going to happen. I promise. Like,
but that's sold to you. That's sold to you from the outside, right? From
yes.
When you're not in the field, I think. So I'm not going to get into this too much because Upgrad is our sponsor and they are an edtech company. So I'm not going to get into about how companies, education companies talk about this a lot. But point is that, I think managing expectations and understanding what you are signing up for is really key there, like you said.
It's very important.
Yeah. So next question. So while you were talking about, this is not there here, so you were talking about getting a data dump and asking to analyze. So were you on the receiving side of such a data dump anytime in your career so far?
Oh yeah, I mean, probably like 4 days ago. I mean, these things happen. People assume that as you get further into your career that this will stop happening, but it doesn't really stop happening. And it's because when you go into a role and you do good work, people start to know that they can come to you for questions and insights. So it's the thing, good work creates more work usually.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
do a good job and then people are going to be like, well, I'm going to go to you every time I need something. But it's true, and it can be hard because you want to help
Yeah.
people out, right? Like I don't want to tell people like, no, go away.
Yeah. Yeah.
But sometimes if what they're asking for isn't aligned with the priorities of the company, like this is something I've had to develop at like a personal level, just saying no, right? Like I can't fit it in. But it's hard when you're starting out in data, you may be new into a role and you want to impress everybody.
So
I think this actually goes back to this creates burnout because you start stressing yourself out by trying to do everything for everybody.
I was actually trying to come from the perspective of like somebody comes to you and says like, here's a data dump, now find insights for us, right? Like,
that's a whole
yeah.
other problem. Yes.
So I was actually trying to come from that perspective.
Yeah, so that happens too. So it's not just a data dump. It's what you're talking about is the core of the issue is that people assume that because they have data, there's something to be found.
Yeah.
Right? Like
absolutely. Yeah.
We have lots of data. We should find something. Here, I collected this data, analyze it to tell me what's important.
Yeah.
And that's an organizational issue often, is you have to understand that the data you collect controls the possible conclusions you're going to be able to make.
Sure.
And you can't just jump in and say like, okay, now we have data, there's going to be some magical conclusion that comes out the other side. But it's true. And so you have to manage expectations. I've had to do, and it's hard because people are like, well, I want a clear answer.
Yeah.
But most of the time you don't get a clear answer from observational data.
Sure.
Like you get at best a potential signal or conclusion. And that's really hard because people are, well, I thought data and statistics was supposed to tell me the truth. No.
Yeah.
That's not it at all.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah. So I think, and a lot of beginners fall into this trap of trying to find insights in all sorts of data, right? Because now you've just started a new job and you want to be able to contribute to the company. You want to be able to seen as a good worker. And now your boss comes to you and say, hey, here's a data dump. Can you find something for? And then you start seeing correlations where you shouldn't be seeing correlations, right? So I think, so my point was, has this happened to you and how do you deal with this? I think you answered that sufficiently well. I think now let's move on more to LinkedIn and what it has done for you, and in general, how important do you think is networking on LinkedIn?
I'm going to give a biased answer because it's pretty much, but the majority of people that I've met have been because of LinkedIn, period. Like, it's a bit unique because I worked there. So it changed, but I would have never posted on there if I didn't work at LinkedIn. So it's all this weird, confluence of things, but networking is critical. And that doesn't mean that you need to be posting frequently to get people following what you're saying. It means that you need to create an image of quality and thinking. And by that doesn't have to be an original post. Some of the most insightful things I've read on the platform come in comments and responses. Like when I post, I try to start discussions. I try to not create like, hey, this is the truth, come get it. I treat it much like,
not like R sucks, Python is the best, nothing like that.
Yeah, like it's not useful for anybody.
Yeah.
So I try to start discussion. And so if you think about networking, it starts small, like connect with people, write a meaningful message to them, interact with people in the comments. And things like that build over time. Like for me, like I'm much more likely to end up connecting with somebody if I've interacted with them in the comments, if we've talked before. Like building those relationships matter. And for me, and for me, it's kind of changed my honestly, it's pretty much changed my entire life in a lot of ways. I mean, I've gone to Switzerland a couple of times. I went to India last year. I was supposed to go to Africa this year to like you don't really know where things are going to go until you just start doing it, and you have to do it regularly. Like, you're not going to post one viral post and like everything's going to change, as you know, right? You kind of have to just be consistent. And in terms of networking, though, yeah, your network is going to more or less determine where you go in your career. So being strategic about how you build your network is critical.
So, of course, now you mentioned about how you try and start discussions through your posts, but you perhaps can't do that when you're just getting started writing on LinkedIn, right? So, how did you get started writing on LinkedIn? Now, I think the next question I had was, how do you decide what to write on LinkedIn? So, I think I'm going to tie all of this. How did you get started writing on LinkedIn? What were your initial thoughts on it? Now, of course, you can't start discussions when you're just getting started. Right?
Yep,
so
exactly.
How did you go about that?
So I think the most meaningful, I think we said this even at the outset, the most meaningful thing you can do is to write about your actual experiences that you're having day to day. Trying to look at what's popular and then posting the same things as what's popular often won't get you the traction or the start that you want. Like, you need to look at, what did you have trouble with? What have you experienced in interviews, job searching? What people really want when it comes down to it is they want authenticity, right? They want to know that like this person really gets it. They experience like challenges day to day, right? You can contrast a couple of things. One would be like, there's certain posts that show on LinkedIn where it's like, there's no chance that is actually a real story that happened. Like, there's no way. Like, you see those come across like super popular posts, and I'm like, there's 0% chance that actually occurred. But people want to be able to see, hey, what did you experience? What did you struggle with? So when I write about SQL and I write about literally the frustrations I have sometimes and like data cleaning, that kind of stuff resonates with people because they understand it. Like, and so I look in that direction, thinking like, okay, what matters to you? Because what matters to you is probably going to matter a lot to other people. In terms of deciding what to post, I wish I had a better like answer. Somebody, I kind of really, so I typically write my posts twice a week. I set time aside. I don't write them brand new. Most times, sometimes I'll write them spur of the moment, but it's hard for me to just wake up and decide to post something. I need to think through it. And so when I think about those topics, I tend to write. So during my work week, I have a sort of a notebook where I'll write things down as I come across ideas. And then I'll sit down and write a few posts, two different times per week. And then I'll share those during the week. I think it's good to keep note of that, because sometimes it's easy to forget your good ideas, right? You're like, man, this would be a really good idea. And then suddenly you're pulled into 5 more hours of work and you forget. So, but when you think about ideas as well, more general ideas tend to resonate with people more than really, really specific things. So even though I am interested in NLP, I probably won't post about it on LinkedIn. I would post more about that on Twitter, probably, where I know the people that care about NLP. LinkedIn is, I would say, a more generalist audience. So like when I write about data professionals and things like that, I try to write about issues like data quality, data cleaning, model building, because those are pretty generally relatable to people. But if you write about this random small subset of thing in machine learning, like a lot of people just won't know what that means or why it matters. Does that make sense?
You'd be surprised the subset is quite big. I mean, the subset you're talking about. I mean, for me, the process is different from the way you described. It's a bit more instantaneous. It's a bit more on the, like you said, on the spur. So I just sit for some time and then I just write. In fact, sometimes I've not even. In fact, sometimes I don't even reread whatever I've written. I'm just writing. Okay, I'm just going to post.
That's good, and I think I think what people figure. I think that message is important because you kind of have to figure out what works for you.
Sure.
Right? Like it's more of a matter, like I know what works best for me in thinking about how to post, but writing spur of the moment is okay too. And people worry about how they phrase things. Did I use the right word? Did I decide on this perfectly? I'm like, if you worry about that, it's going to stop you from posting.
Yep.
Just post, kind of learn about what happened when you posted. Sure. And kind of think about things from there. But I really think that's good. It's probably a good example to see you and I post in different ways, because there's no one right way to do this. You kind of just have to figure out what is most meaningful for you.
And this was a fear for me as well, like you mentioned, right? Am I writing the right words? Not in terms of writing, but in terms of making a video. So I've recently started making videos on YouTube, which is something very new to me, and I'm very skeptical of how things will go, and I'm like all the time. So for me, it was all the thing that was holding me back was, is this video of good enough quality, right? Like, is it really looking good enough? Is this having the right things? But then that was holding me back from even getting started. So and now I've let go of that, and I just put my curtains behind, and then I just start talking. So hopefully I'll get better at this. Yeah, hopefully.
Everybody improves over time. Like, you get better at it. You have to practice though. Like, you're not going to start out by being really good at writing and creating content. You just kind of got to start somewhere.
Sure. Yeah. Hopefully I can improve on my video shooting, editing skills, and I think I have one last question from my side, which is what is one advice that you would give to anyone starting out right now?
So starting out right now, there's a lot of things going on in the world. But what's going to be important at the end of the day is, again, it comes back to this idea of look at your position as if you are an executive in a company, and think about if you were to invest money, imagine that it was your money that you were spending, right? As like a CEO. What would make you say, okay, this person should be part of my company, right? It's like and so that can come in multiple ways, right? In some cases, this person just becomes really foundational and helps you understand and get your data in order, right? They help build the right foundation. In other cases, this person actually understands the business so well that they help you actually think through what ideas to take and go forward with. Or sometimes they're just so talented in their specific area of data or machine learning, and that it's easy to see the return on investment. And so if you think about that, and it's kind of uncomfortable and weird, but if you say like, okay, why, if I'm going to get paid this salary, what justifies it, right? Like, what am I doing for the business to help them move forward? And so I think that's useful in that way, because to the business, it's not about R or Python or the tool that you're using typically. It's about, can you get to useful things, and can you help us grow as a company, right? And it's a useful mindset. And it's really important amidst a time like we're in now, where hiring is more limited. But that kind of mindset and that approach can definitely make you stand out.
Sure. One last related question on that. So you wrote a post on how you've read more than 5,000 resumes so far, and so I think I'm not going to get into the post. I'm just trying to ask you. Let's say you are reading yet another resume. What are the immediate red flags you would see in a resume, and how would somebody go about correcting them?
Yeah, red flags I see, and these are, and again, I don't want people to take this as criticism, because no one really teaches you how to write a good resume. You just kind of are supposed to figure it out along the way. But
Sure.
typically what happens when I see a resume is people treat it like a historical document where they list everything they've done at every previous position. It's not that. It shouldn't be that. Your resume is a marketing document. You are the thing that is being marketed. And so
Sure.
part of that means making sure to emphasize the things that matter most to the place that you're applying. If you think about marketing, so I gave an example yesterday. If you contrast two statements, like I built this model and we used it, versus I built this model in this amount of time and it saved this much money and it created this much opportunity for other people, those are entirely different statements. And I notice, so what stands out to me is when people can position things in terms of maybe impact, maybe model performance, maybe something that connects back to the business. And you don't have to, I know it's tempting to write this, on a resume, I have to write what all of my job description was. You don't. Just pick the most relevant things. And so if you go, so if you look at it as a marketing document, be like, would I be interested? Would this pique my interest if I was a hiring manager? It can be a really good mindset to have, but again, it's kind of uncomfortable too. Every time I look at my resume, I'm like, because you don't know.
Especially if you come from an engineering science background, right? It's not easy to think of it from a marketing perspective, but
It's not.
I think it's very important there. I think that's all for the questions that I have.